Chapter 26. Absence of a Mother. A short while later, Eventide set about preparing something for them to eat. He had enough leftovers, he said, and it wouldn't be a problem. In the end, he was able to scrounge up a small plate of 2 apples and leftover chicken from the previous night's dinner. While Fluttershy and Eventide ate and talked, Bebe remained nicely situated on Buddha's belly, resting and listening to them discuss various things over their food. Most of it went right over his head, though. Grown-up stuff, he figured. Eventually, though, Buddha apparently got tired of being used as a makeshift mattress. With a snort of dissatisfaction, she rolled to the side, sending Bebe sliding off and onto the floor. He landed on his rump with a yelp of surprise, then pouted at Buddha in supreme offense.
Hey! I was napping on you,
he protested in a whine, lightly thwacking his hoof on her hip. The golden retriever just looked at him with a flat expression for a few moments, unquestionably unamused by the impact. She then rose up to her paws and began to walk away, leaving Bebe behind on the floor. He watched her go, then spun around so his back was to her. He crossed his forelegs over his chest and huffed in an adorably childish sulk, shoving his nose into the air.
Fine,
he called back at her.
I didn't want to nap on your tummy anymore anyway.
He then noticed Eventide and Fluttershy looking down at him with charmed smiles. He glanced back at Buddha, then at his dad and aunt. A sheepish smile grew on his face.
Sorry?
Eventide chortled under his breath and shook his head. Yeah, you should leave her alone for a little while. You've been so hyper today, I don't think she can really stand much more of it, he advised, no small amount of mirth in his voice. Fluttershy gave a nod of agreement.
Yes, and you should probably keep resting anyway. You're probably pretty worn out still.
Bebe groaned in disappointment, but he had to concede the point. As nice as his rest on Buddha had been, he was still feeling pretty worn out. All the same, he got up onto his hooves to slowly trudge over to the base of the table. Once he got there, he looked up at the people staring down at him. They observed him, curious about what he was up to. His eyes danced back and forth between them for a short time, studying them with his own form of curiosity. When Fluttershy took an absent bite out of what was left of the apple Eventide had given her, he knew his course. After a few moments of figuring out an angle, Bebe crouched and jumped, giving his wings a quick buzz to help him along. He soared up through the air and pulled himself up onto the table without issue, swiftly plunking down onto his backside once he was up. His eyes then fell onto the apple in Fluttershy's hand.
Can I have some of that?
He asked hopefully. Fluttershy just stared at him, bewildered. After a few moments, she shook herself, cleared her throat, and spoke up.
Bebe? You don't usually eat physical food, do you?
She asked in confusion. Bebe nodded in confirmation.
Yeah, but Dad lets me have some of his food every now and then. It doesn't really feel my tummy, but it tastes good,
he answered before pointing at the apple.
I've never had an apple before. May I?
Fluttershy looked down at her apple, then up at Bebe. She then looked over at Eventide for approval. She just shrugged and gestured vaguely for her to do as she saw fit. So with that done, Fluttershy smiled and looked at Bebe again.
Sure, little guy. Here you go,
she said pleasantly before passing the bug the entire apple. Bebe's eyes went wide at first, as he had been expecting only a small piece or maybe a slice at most. Now, granted, Fluttershy had already eaten half of it, but still. He looked at her and grinned happily.
Whoa! Thank you, Aunt Fluttershy,
he chirped before pulling the apple closer with his hooves and sinking his fangs into it. He let out a thoughtful hum as he ate, clearly giving the taste and texture a great amount of consideration. Both Eventide and Fluttershy watched him eat, amused and pleased by his demeanor. Bebe couldn't help but pause briefly in his nibbling as he saw the thick swaths of pink mist falling off of both of them, doubly so from Eventide. He capitalized on it, though, sucking in what he could as he ate with intense inhales. As a result, he began to hiss and snarl through mouthfuls of apple as he ate, surprising both of the adults. Fluttershy's mouth formed a surprised "oh" at the sound, and she looked over at Eventide in confusion.
Does he usually make noises like that?
He shrugged. "No, not really," was his response before he turned his attention back to Bebe with an amused smirk. "But I don't mind. It's kinda cute." Fluttershy couldn't argue with that, and giggled when Bebe let out a particularly loud snort. Sadly, any further discussion was stifled when, suddenly, the sound of a ringing phone came from Fluttershy's pocket. She quickly pulled it out to check and see who it was calling her, and her eyes lit up with recognition.
"It's my mom. Wait a second, please,"
she said before answering the device and holding it up to her ear. Bebe watched her intently as she talked, even as he devoured the apple she had so kindly gifted to him. Her speech was lost on him, though, as one sentence was left echoing in his mind over all of the others.
"It's my mom."
Bebe's brow furrowed as he swallowed another piece of apple.
"Mom."
He watched her for several moments as he gave it some thought, then turned to watch Eventide. Fluttershy gave a curt nod into her phone.
"Okay, Mom. Thanks so much for reminding me. I'll be there soon,"
she said before ending the call and stuffing the phone back into her pocket. She rose from the chair with an apologetic look on her face.
"I'm terribly sorry, you two, but I have to go. I need to be at the animal shelter in a little bit, and my mom was just reminding me to head over."
Eventide nodded in understanding. He rose and went to see her to the door. "All right, we'll see you later, Fluttershy. Thanks for coming over," he said before glancing at Bebe over his shoulder. "Say bye, Bee." That snapped the little guy out of his ruminations, and he looked at Fluttershy with a big smile. He waved happily at her as she made her way for the door.
"Bye, Aunt Fluttershy, and thanks for the apple." "You're very welcome, Bebe,"
came the response. Fluttershy flashed them both one more heartfelt smile, then slipped outside, closing the door behind her. Shortly after Fluttershy left, Eventide and Bebe got comfortable down on the chair to watch TV. They had wound up settling on a nature documentary channel by Bebe's request, and had spent the last few hours just watching whatever came on. The sun was starting to set now, and the light of the sun had long since turned a deep orange. On the TV screen, a couple of colorful birds could be seen in a tree tending to their eggs, while the narrator talked about what they were doing. Eventide was only half paying attention to the television, if he was being honest. Most of his attention was occupied with his own internal musings and the feeling of Bebe resting against him. That all changed when Bebe shifted to look up in Eventide's eyes. He didn't say anything, though it was clear he had a question on his mind. Eventide focused on him, sitting upright. "What is it, Bee?" he prodded in a relaxed tone. "Got a question?" Bebe looked back at the screen for a moment, his wings twitching on his back.
Those birds. They're parents, right?"
he said quietly, his voice sounding unsure.
"A mama and a dada, taking care of their eggs."
Eventide nodded slowly. "Yep. Those birds mate for life. They'll stay together for the rest of their lives."
"Kinda like you and Aunt Fluttershy?"
Eventide leaned back a bit in surprise, his brow furrowing. No. Fluttershy's your aunt, not your mom. She and I aren't even in love, so..." He gave an absent shrug.
"So, I don't have a mama?"
Bebe finally asked. Eventide looked away and let out a heavy sigh. Of course, he had known that this question would come up sooner or later, but that hadn't stopped him from really hoping it wouldn't. It had been hard enough when Bebe caught on to the fact he was adopted. Eventide sat up a bit more and muted the TV with the remote. I'm sorry, Bebe, but no. At least not one who's here. I mean, you never know. Maybe you do have a mom out there, somewhere. But if you do, she isn't here, he said gently while holding Bebe close. Fluttershy is not your mom, but she does love you. And so do I. Bebe gave a slow, hesitant nod, although he visibly relaxed, undoubtedly from the love that Eventide was making an active effort to emphasize internally. He rotated in his father's arms to return the hug, wrapping his forelegs around his neck and resting his chin on his shoulder.
I love you both too,
he said in a hushed voice, closing his eyes. Not far away, resting on her side with her back against the coffee table, Bebe turned her eyes to watch them, curious. Eventide saw this and smirked. And I think Buddha probably loves you more than the rest of us, he observed playfully. Bebe leaned back and craned his neck to look at the dog in question, and his face lit up with a small smile.
Yeah, Buddha really doesn't hold back. She lets out a lot,
he acknowledged with a small laugh. But then, Bebe looked back at Eventide with his somber expression returning.
So, how come I don't have a mama? Why isn't Fluttershy my mama?
He asked in a soft, unsure tone, his face falling. Eventide hesitated for a second, his brain working to find a good way to answer his son's question. Eventually, though, as always, he settled for the truth. Well, I guess Fluttershy is kinda your mom? She's helped me take care of you ever since I found you, and she's here whenever I can't be, but, well, we call her your aunt because that's a somewhat closer equivalent. And you remember how I found your egg under the tree in the yard, right?
Uh-huh.
At that point, you weren't my son. But then you hatched, you came into my life as a grub, and, well, here we are, 6 months later. And don't you go forgetting about Pete, he reiterated with his smile returning. Maybe you don't have a full-time mommy, but you do have us. You're our Pete, and we're your birds. Bebe gave another smile at that, his expression brightening at the memory. He leaned into the hug again, looking past Eventide and out the window. For a time, the two were silent, just enjoying the other's embrace. Eventide took the opportunity to shut off the TV when the documentary shifted gears to lions on the hunt for some wild elk. Bebe didn't need to see that, especially not right now.
Do you have a mama and a dada?
Bebe suddenly asked, his question coming completely out of nowhere. Eventide went rigid at the question, and Bebe suddenly drew back, a guilty look on his face.
Oh no, why are you upset? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you mad.
He quickly apologized in a frantic voice, scooting back a little. Eventide sucked in a breath and shook his head dismissively while forcing down his feelings. No, you're fine. I'm not upset with you, Bebe, he assured quickly, though he did gently move the little guy down to the floor so he wouldn't have to be right in the flow of the emotions.
But you are upset,
Bebe protested, taking a few steps back once he was on the floor.
Dark blue, black, red.
He shuddered and backed away even more.
There's a lot of red in there.
Eventide turned his eyes up to the ceiling, closed them, and took a deep breath. Then another, and another. After almost 20 seconds of just breathing, he got his rampaging thoughts in order and looked down at Bebe again. Those large, glowing blue eyes were boring up into him, filled with an apology and boundless curiosity. Eventide sighed and slid out of the chair and onto his knees in front of Bebe. Okay. Bebe, look. I do have a mom and dad. And your grandparents. But I would really appreciate it if you didn't ask me about them. Okay? Bebe tilted his head in confusion at the tone in Eventide's voice.
But why not? Do they know about me?
He asked carefully, then flinched back a little, presumably because of more outpouring emotions from Eventide. He shook his head slowly. No, they don't. I'm not going to tell them about you either. Not anytime soon, at least. Bebe inched forwards a little, his ears standing up with curiosity.
Are they bad people?
He pressed tentatively. Eventide's eyes drifted away from Bebe, finding the dull, grayish-brown carpet under them far more interesting for the moment. No. They're good people. I'm just... He shuddered at the memory. I'm just not on the best of terms with my mom. We had a bit of a disagreement before I moved here.
What were you disagreeing about?
Eventide shook his head. Bebe...
What were you disagreeing about? Why can't you let them know I'm here?
Bebe asked in a more pressing voice, his eyes pleading.
I have a grandpa and a grandma. Why can't I meet them? Why don't you like your mom?
Eventide screwed his eyes shut and lifted a finger in warning. Bebe? Please stop. I get that you want to know, I do, and I'll happily tell you when you're a bit older, but my parents... Rather, my mother is a very touchy subject. I had to deal with a lot of drama because of her, and you already have enough to deal with, okay? He explained before opening his eyes. So please, don't ask me about her again. Or at the very least, wait until we've moved out and gotten settled in wherever we're going. Okay? Bebe gave a slow nod and looked down at the floor.
Okay, Dada. I'm sorry I made you mad.
He apologized softly, his ears drooping along with his wings. Eventide saw the sad side and visibly wilted. He scooted forwards and gingerly scooped Bebe up into his arms, holding him tight against his chest. Hey. I'm sorry too. He whispered quietly into his son's ear while gingerly stroking the back of his head with a hand. Bebe hiccuped, then nodded as he clung to Eventide's chest.
I know. I can see it.
He choked out before going silent. Buddha, at this point, seemed to finally get fed up with just watching them. She rose to her paws and quickly made her way over to them, a concerned look on her face. She sat down in front of Eventide and softly put her muzzle right between Bebe's wings, allowing the small bug to know she was there and feel her comforting presence. It seemed to work, too, as within a few minutes he visibly relaxed. Eventually, he turned around and lifted a hoof to stroke Buddha's cheek.
Thanks, Buddha. Good puppy.
He said weakly before leaning into Eventide again.
I'm tired, Dada. I think I'm ready for sleep.
He mumbled, his voice indeed getting drowsy. Eventide nodded. All right, if you say so. he said before standing up and tenderly carrying his son down to the basement, tucking him in and wishing him good night.